Hello, friends. It's a pleasure to be with you again here on Walking with God in the Garden. I'm Richard Halls. I'm the pastor of this program. And as I share stories of the Bible with you each week, I also like to give what I call a little moralism, something that has to do with life, but also some illustration from my garden. I've mentioned that the garden is where we live. The Bible says that God created a garden and took Adam and Eve and put them in the garden to till it, be responsible for it, but also to enjoy it. I believe that is how it is with our lives. God has created a place for us. He places us in that place, and he says, now walk with me in this garden. We can try to live a life without God in our world, but we will find conflict. We will find that there is a lack of peace. There might be a form of prosperity, but ultimately something is missing. And that which is missing is a relationship with God. I cannot encourage you enough in the development of that relationship. Get to know God. Walk with him. As I was walking through my garden recently, I noticed something about the weeds that were growing in the garden. Now, I don't know if you've experienced much with weeds, but I have. And I noticed that weeds have no partiality. They don't care what kind of weed is growing up next to it. If one weed is stronger than the other, it will do anything and everything to squash that competitor. We could call some weeds bully weeds, and they do bully the weaker weed. They want to be prominent. They want to be the biggest, and they want to rob the most from the soil. Is this the way it is with we human beings? Are we like these weeds, wanting to usurp those that are weaker, to be first, dominant? If we look historically at mankind, we'd have to say it's true. Story of Cain and Abel, the first two children in the world, illustrate this. Cain is jealous of his brother because his brother has something he doesn't have. And in his anger and wrath, he kills his brother. And the story succeeds over and over and over again as one nation seeks to be stronger than the other nation, to dominate it, to exploit it, and in some cases, even to destroy it. We also find this to be true between races. Some races want to be supreme. They want to be first. They want the authority. They want to rule. We find it in families, siblings, competing over the affection of their parents or their parents' possessions. Many lawsuits have been conducted over just such issues. Or maybe neighbors who are in conflict over some issue. May or may not be important, but one wants to be first. There's a story in the Bible about this. And that story is the story of Joseph. In that story of Joseph, we have the beginning of the problem. Begins very early, much earlier than just the story of Joseph's birth. Begins with his dad, Jacob. And the Bible says that Jacob had two wives, and he loved one more than the other. Probably natural, for whatever reason, but he did. Ultimately, he had a child from the one that he loved, whose name was Rachel. And that child was Joseph. Jacob loved Joseph, but he had other children, and he did not favor them like he favored Joseph. We are told that he made Joseph a coat of many colors. And this irritated his brothers to the point that his brothers hated him and wanted to destroy him. They plotted to kill him, do everything possible to get rid of him, and finally an opportunity came one day for they to sell him as a slave to the Egyptians. They got some money for it. They contrived a story for their dad by killing an animal, taking the coat of many colors, saturating it with blood, and then going home, lying to their father about Joseph, and they suggested some wild animal must have killed him. The old man, Jacob, Joseph's dad, weeps for the loss of his son. I wonder what his brothers, Joseph's brothers, thought. How did they see their father now? Not only that day, but days down into weeks and months. Every time they saw their father, did they think about their lie, their conniving to get Joseph out of the way? We don't know what they were thinking, but it must have been a characteristic, as it is true, of all people who do bad things. They never overcome it. It's always with them. When do these issues come to the surface? We've experienced some of that, of the wrongs which one group has done against another. Just recently, Tulsa, Oklahoma issue, the massacre of a black community. The orphanages in Canada, where hundreds of children were buried en masse who were in an orphanage. We find it in the world as one group fights against another for justice, exposing the wrongs of the past. Whatever it is that provokes a confrontation, ultimately an exposure, they're there. There's a story, and I want to continue that, about Joseph. And actually the theme today is the theme of reconciliation. People coming together, resolving the conflict, living in peace and harmony. Isn't that what we want? We want those people in India to love the people of Pakistan. We want the Jews and the Palestinians to live in harmony and in peace, not fracturing, not separating, not trying to destroy each other. We want the colored in this country and the whites to enjoy life and the freedoms we all have. That's what we want. At least that's what I want. But what is it going to take for all of this to happen? We have the story in Joseph's life, and I want to just read a portion of it for you because I think it's so intriguing. And you can read it too from Genesis chapter 45. And it is when finally there is a famine and the brothers of Joseph have to come to Egypt to buy food. And unbeknownst to them, they have to appear before Joseph. Joseph is dressed differently. He doesn't have the same clothing that he had when they sold him. He now dresses like an Egyptian, and he's a ruler. He's a man of authority. So the brothers have to face him. They don't know who he is, but Joseph knows who his brothers are. And there's some intrigue that goes on, but finally the day comes when Joseph is going to reconcile with his brothers. It's a wonderful story. It's a touching story. And I read it for you today from Genesis chapter 45. And it says, "Then Joseph said to his brothers, 'Come close to me.' When they had done so, he said, 'I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold as a slave into Egypt.'" That's only part of the story. The real dramatic part comes when he reconciles or he shares with his brother, Benjamin. And let me just share this with you. "Then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept. And Benjamin embraced him, weeping. And he kissed all his brothers and wept over them." As I read this account of Joseph and how he reconciled with his brothers, the Bible says he wept over them. He kissed them. He embraced them. First, we need reconciliation with God. And the Bible says that's how God is. He weeps over us. He embraces us. And if you can even symbolically imagine God kissing us, welcoming us again back into his arms and to fellowship with him. And how important is it that we reconcile with those around us? It's the most beautiful and expressive thing that anybody could ever do. To forgive and to share one's life. Yes, maybe with weeping, maybe with embracing, but in some way to know that we belong to the same family that God has created. And we all need the same thing, which is reconciliation with ourselves, with those around us, and with God himself. God bless you. May this be a step of faith and peace in your life. Please dial again in for another Walking with God Through the Garden next week.